Hello there, and welcome to the first of our Good Governance webinars for 2024, where we're going to talk about how the Third Sector Governance Code and SCVO's Good Governance Checkup has been reviewed and updated, and also look at some practical hints and tips to help you and your board be as effective and sustainable as possible. My name is Tracy Bird, and I run the SCVO Trustee Network, which is sponsored by Rathbones, one of the leading charity investment managers in the UK, and whose support enables us to offer these free sessions to our members. Andrea Hanley is joining us today from Rathbones, and I wonder, Andrew, would you just like to say a few words?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Tracy. So we here at Rathbones are a major investor for charities, and we're delighted to be sponsoring the Trustee Network and support the programme of events which SCVO run for trustees. As part of your membership, you have access to the team here at Rathbones if you have any investment related questions, or if it's something which you'd like to consider or discuss, please do reach out to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. So thank you all for coming along today. And while people are still joining us, do take the time to introduce yourselves in the chat. And because we've got such a good turnout today, which we're delighted with, I wondered if you could just add one topic that you as a trustee need help with this year, because this is going to help us inform our planning for webinars across the year.
No video, no noise.
Sorry. So if you can do that as people are joining, and just to note that we're recording this session. So if you've got any potentially difficult issues that maybe you don't want to air in public and you'd like to discuss with us directly, you can make an appointment with myself or my colleague Rhonda for a one-to-one session. And also to note, we will send all the slides out to you afterwards and links to further resources in a follow-up email. As well as Andrea, I'm also delighted to be joined today by Philippa Bonella, and she's SCVO's new governance trainer and will be running a series of governance training modules later in the year. And she's going to tell you all about that, along with some practical hints to take away and use on your board. But before that, I'm going to start us off with a look at the newly revised Scottish Governance Code for the Third Sector, and just tell you a little bit about what's changed and where you can find out more. As we go along, do share your own knowledge and experience and any questions you have in the chat, just so we can learn from each other. And while I'm getting set up with the slides, I wonder if you could also, I'm trying to get you to do some work today as well. I wondered if you could just tell me in the chat, what do you think governance is all about?
I'll try and go on. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got some comments coming in there, and thank you for that. Sort these slides out so I can see them properly. Okay. So, what is governance? Well, I think this formal definition from Bayes Business School, they have a Centre for Charity Effectiveness. Somebody's calling me, sorry. I think this formal definition of governance sums it up quite nicely. And just to paraphrase, governance is all about trustees leading and setting the vision for their organisation. It's about providing direction and supervising your organisation's activities so that they match up what you're set up to do. And it's about long-term strategic decisions rather than the day-to-day operations. Though sometimes these lines do get blurred, and we'll talk about that a little later. And it's important to know really what governance is about and the role and responsibilities of a trustee, because good governance matters in all sectors, banking, NHS, the post office, shall we say, but particularly in the charity sector, because we exist to support our beneficiaries and benefit the public. And also because ensuring good governance in your organisation is the best way to protect and enhance the reputation of not just any charity you're part of, but our sector as a whole. Because a good reputation takes years to build, and, you know, it can be destroyed overnight. And bad press, poor governance, and reputational damage can be really hard to recover from. So, but governance is not just about stopping bad things happening, and the governance code is all about encouraging good practice and making sure that boards can perform to their very best. The Scottish Governance Code for the third sector was created in 2018 by Scotland's Third Sector Governance Forum, which I'm part of. And it's designed for all organisations, whatever their shape, size or activities, whether they're charities, voluntary organisations or social enterprises. It's not a legal or regulatory requirement, and instead it hopefully provides a standard to aspire to. It's there to support continuous improvement and strengthen the effectiveness of governance across the sector. Now, it sets out 5 principles, and they're all of equal importance. And they want people to look at and improve their governance. So at this point, I'm just going to do a poll. Helen, my colleague, is going to set that up just to find out about general awareness of the Scottish Governance Code for the third sector. So I wonder, Helen, could you launch that poll? And I wonder if you could just answer, have you seen the good governance, sorry, not the good governance checkup, this is about the code. But if you can answer that, if you know about the code, that's it, sorry. If you're aware of it, you know about the 5 principles, perhaps you've used it in your organisations, and that'll just help. So what have we got there? Oh, more people that haven't heard of it. Well, that's good. I'm going to tell you all about it today. So we're going to say 57% no, 43% yes. So that shows certainly the Governance Forum and SCVO have got a lot of work to do there in raising awareness of the code. Okay, thank you, Helen, for that. So these are the code's 5 core principles, and each principle has a summary statement followed by an explanation of how you can demonstrate and implement that principle. And as I said before, the code's principles are universal, but how an organisation implements each of them will depend on its size, income and activities. Now, the link here on the slide will take you to the code on the SCVO website, where you can view each of the sections and also download them as a PDF. Now, you'll notice in the 5 I've listed here, I've highlighted risk management in red. Now, that's because it's been added after the review, and I'll tell you more about that now. So, as I said, the code was originally developed in 2018 and to provide a statement of best practice on what good governance looks like. But since then, I would say both our understanding of good governance and stakeholders' expectations have evolved. There's been so much change and challenge in our sector over the last few years. You know, we've still got our perennial funding challenges, and we've got added to that a cost of living crisis. But we've also had a worldwide pandemic. We've seen ongoing digital change. We've got a growing environmental crisis. And we've also got increasing demand for greater equality, diversity and inclusion. So we knew that we had to update the code. And in 2022, we carried out a consultation asking the sector what they thought was missing or could be strengthened in the code. And this produced a number of recommendations, which we've now incorporated into a newly revised code. We've maintained the code's 5 broad principles, but in these 5 main areas, we've updated accompanying statements and also strengthened the detail of how you demonstrate each of the principles. So as I highlighted earlier, we've added risk management to the headline principle of control. And this was in response to many of the consultation comments, which emphasised the need for trustees to better analyse their external environment so that they can fully identify, manage and report on both risks and opportunities. So we made this more explicit and strengthened the summary statements and how you would demonstrate this. We also looked at the importance of trustees maintaining ultimate responsibility for decision-making and the actions of the organisation, and also ensuring that delegation is clear and appropriate and properly documented and supervised. We further developed the references to safeguarding in the code and drawing this out in a separate statement to emphasise that trustees have ultimate responsibility for developing a safe and respectful culture for all, as well as complying with legal safeguarding duties and responsibilities. And another risk to us all is climate change. So the Scottish Government declared a climate emergency in May 2019, and many of the code review respondents highlighted the need for trustees to really consider the potential impacts of environmental change on their beneficiaries and the sustainability of their organisation. In addition, I know from my work that many funders are starting to ask applicants if they've considered how their operations will negatively affect the environment and what they've done to mitigate this. So the revised code reflects this. The rationale for asking trustees to consider the risks of climate change in the code, which is a tool for best practice, the rationale is framed as it being a risk to the delivery of your mission and sustainable positive change. And all charities, whether they've got an environmental purpose or not, should recognise their broader responsibilities towards wider society and the impact of climate change on their organisation and those they serve. So we added a new statement to the principle of board behaviour, stating that boards need to ensure that the organisation takes account of climate change and other environmental factors in its decision making. Now, there's a whole other webinar we could do around this, but in the meantime, I would encourage you to take a look at SCVO's Growing Climate Confidence website and the links here if you need more help on taking positive climate action on your board. This website's got loads of resources there to help you learn about climate change and net zero, top tips, policy reports, and there's also a section for trustees which looks at how to start the conversation at senior level, so trustees and senior staff understand why climate change and the transition to net zero are issues that are really worth investing your time and money in. And some of the key questions to consider at board level: should climate change be on your risk register? How will it impact your service users and the way you deliver your activities? And if you're lucky enough to have significant savings and investments, you may also want to consider whether they're making a positive or a negative contribution to climate change. And I know Rathbones are doing some great work in this area. And as Andrea mentioned before, they'd be happy to talk to SCVO member organisations to explore this further. So, onto the equality, diversity and inclusion angle of what the code review revealed. So the initial governance code was based on the understanding that all voluntary organisations should fully recognise equality, diversity and inclusion as an essential part of good governance. And this underpinned all of the 5 principles originally. But I do think that we would all recognise that generally charity boards are still less diverse than the general population, and they often don't reflect the communities they serve. Both the Black Lives Matter movement and the Charity So White campaign sparked reflections about power and privilege and inequality in our sector. And many of the respondents to the code review, they told us that what was in the code, the original code, just wasn't enough. So with the help from Third Sector Human Rights and Equalities Project, we've strengthened the language and the detail surrounding EDI throughout the code. And just to draw your attention to 2 things in particular, under the leadership principle, we've amended the statements to ensure that trustees should create an inclusive culture through their own behaviour and embed EDI across all aspects of their organisation. And similarly, under the effectiveness principle, we've added the need for trustees to proactively identify and implement opportunities for diversity and representation on their boards. and put EDI at the centre how they work. And I know that trustee recruitment can be difficult, and we do need more people keen to be trustees. So I would say, however, that the system we have just now does suit experienced professionals with traditional, dare I say, middle-class career trajectories. You know, the kind of people who know their way around a risk register and a spreadsheet, and they drive our charities. They're really important. But I think we do need more young people to be interested in trusteeship, and we do need more people from diverse backgrounds. And that's not just to fill the gaps, but they will add a new and different perspective and value to our organisations. So if you're looking for more support on how to diversify your board, I would recommend this excellent free guide, which you can download from Getting on Board, a charity in England. It's full of practical advice and case studies, and it's got downloadable templates, which will help you build a successful recruitment and onboarding strategy for new trustees. I mentioned the input that we had from third sector human rights and equalities. They really helped us with reviewing the code. So do check out their website. And if you're looking for more support with EDI on your board, they offer training for boards, and they've got lots of resources you can access as well. The code review also recognised the value of partnership working. And, you know, that's understandable against the background of those funding challenges and cost of living crisis. So under the principle of organisational purpose, what we did was we added that trustees should regularly and proactively monitor and review the sustainability of their organisation, and really evaluate the benefits and risks of collaborating or even merger. In addition, the revised code also suggests that trustees should proactively consider dissolution if other organisations are fulfilling similar purposes more effectively, or even if the organisation's viability is uncertain. These are difficult things to deal with as a trustee, but if this is something your organisation is considering, we do have resources on our website at this link, and one-to-one support is available for SCVO members. And finally, a big theme of the code consultation comments centred around the importance of board dynamics, and reflected, I think, really how many individuals' experience of, shall we say, toxic relations and dysfunction on a board can ultimately destroy an organisation. So that's why the revised code has strengthened the importance of trustees managing both real and perceived conflicts of interest. And they should do that in line with the law, their governing document, and any kind of conflict of interest policy that you have. We also highlighted that the board collectively need to deal with any dominant trustees and power imbalances, which may affect an organisation's reputation, its public support, or the delivery of its aims. Now, if this is something you are experiencing on a board, if you're an SCVO member, as I said, you can book a one-to-one session with myself or my colleague Rhonda to discuss this. You can also access SCVO's mediation service, where you can get help from an independent mediator to find ways of moving forward. And we run the mediation service in partnership with Scottish Mediation, and organisations with an annual income of under £50,000 can get mediation at no cost. But I would say, of course, mediation only works where the two parties are willing to recognise the issues and come to the table to talk about them. And if you're not at that stage, or you don't even know where to begin, the SCVO Good Governance Checkup can be a helpful way to start any difficult conversations at board level. So now I'm going to look at the checkup. But before I do that, can I ask how many of you have used the checkup before? This is on the SCVO website. If you can just give me a thumbs up so I can get an idea of that, that would be great. Thank you. Now, I can't see the thumbs up, but I'm going to ask my colleagues if they can tell me later how many have seen the checkup. So For those of you that haven't used the Checkup before, this is what it looks like. We've developed it to support the Third Sector Governance Code and help you think about how you can demonstrate good governance in your organisation. As I said, it's available on the SCVO website, and it's designed to help you find out what you're doing well and prioritise areas for improvement. We're busy updating the format and the questions right now in line with the code review, and there'll be lots of new resources there as well. So I would say completing the Checkup is a good way to demonstrate you understand the importance of effective governance within your organisation. So what do we need to know from you when you do the Checkup? Well, it asks you a series of questions about your organisation, and this is, whether you're a charity, what your legal structure is, if you've got staff or members, your income, and whether you operate locally, nationally, or internationally. And what this does is enables us to tailor the Checkup questions for your organisation. You then go into each of the 5 principles where you get asked specific questions that will show how you evidence good governance. And these include things like, do you regularly review your constitution? Do you have details on a quorum needed for meetings, maximum number of trustees, what your trustee recruitment and induction's like, all that kind of thing. And it takes about 20 minutes to complete the Checkup. And what you can do is you can save your progress as you go and come back to it if you have to. And when you finish it, you get a personalised action plan on screen based on your answers, which will look like this. And it highlights where you're doing well and where you might need to do some work. And you can just discuss this with the rest of the board to agree on a plan of action. And what you get along with the action plan is you also get links to further resources, such as model template policies and procedures on areas like a trustee code of conduct, conflict of interest policy, complaints policy. We have an induction checklist, a register of interests, all those kinds of things. So you get all of that, and you also get an email with a link to the report, so you can come back to it later. And you can book in a follow-up call with SCVO where you can talk about the results of your Checkup and help plan your next steps. In the email that we send you, the link enables you to share your results with other board members, and then you can encourage them to take the Checkup themselves. Because you're completing the Checkup as an individual trustee. You can't answer for everyone on your board. And, you might have been a trustee for many years, but you might be, so you'll have a different viewpoint to a new trustee on the board. But I would say there's so much value in doing this as a whole board exercise where all your trustees complete the Checkup, because that way you can identify areas where you can work on together and celebrate collectively and find out if there's any further support needs for individual trustees. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a really good way to start any potentially difficult conversations at board level on such things such as board effectiveness, board behaviour. And if you're an SCVO member organisation, we can provide you with a single source of feedback that reflects the views of everyone involved. So we've had over 400 Checkups now completed by trustees across Scotland, and we're beginning to build a really good picture of governance across the sector. And looking at the responses, these bullet points are the questions where most organisations, that is over half, answered no. So they didn't link a new trustee with an existing one to mentor. They didn't ask for references from prospective trustees, didn't have an annual board review or a skills audit, and more than half didn't take part in any kind of diversity training and really understand their responsibilities in this area. And out of those 4 bullet points, I wonder how much that chimes with your board. Do put that in the chat so we can get some conversation going. That would be good. So that's pretty much it from me. Before I hand over to Philippa, I'll leave you with information on where you can access further support from SCVO. And don't forget your local third sector interface for help with all things governance as well. I'm going to stop sharing now and have a look to see if there's any questions that have come in. Philippa, is there anything that we can address with questions?
I've been keeping an eye on the chat for you. There's been quite a lot of practical questions which Rhonda has been fielding for you as we go about how people can speak to you one-to-one more. There's been two main questions that have popped up a couple of times. One is any advice on recruiting trustees, because it's really hard at the moment, as we all know. And the other one is about the review of the checkup, because the code's been reviewed. So when will the checkup be reviewed?
Okay, I'll take the checkup one first. I've done a lot of the work and I've handed it to our wonderful IT and web team. So it's sitting with them now. We would hope to get that completed by the end of this month, by the end of January. You can still take the checkup now, but obviously it doesn't reflect what is in the new things in the code. But yes, we would hope to launch that end of January, beginning of February. And with regard to trustee recruitment, yes, it is really, really difficult. We had an offer on with Good Moves during Trustee Week where people could put a free ad on Good Moves. And I would say make your trustee advertising, your recruitment as open and transparent as possible. That way you're going to go out your usual circles. You know, not everybody can afford to have a free, put an ad in Good Moves if it's not for free during Trustees Week. So there are other places, your local volunteer centre. And I'll put something in the chat. We've got a link on trustee recruitment on our website, and that gives you lots of useful hints and tips. But if that is an issue that you're all interested in, we can certainly do a webinar on trustee recruitment. I was talking to Richard, who heads up the Good Moves team. So I think we'll be looking at doing something on trustee recruitment April, May time. So keep an eye on the SCVO events page. Is that about it, Philippa? I've just seen a question there about the boundaries and relationships between board staff and membership. And I think you're going to cover that, aren't you, Philippa? I'm going to hand that one over to you.
I'll maybe cover it a bit, but if not, then the questioner can come back to me after my slides.
Okay. Over to you then, Philippa.
Okay, thanks very much. Bear with me, everyone, while I bring my slides up. And I guess someone will tell me if they're not working.
They're working. We can see them. Thanks.
Fabulous. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about today is very briefly about the new governance training course that I've been designing with SCVO, which is based on regular problems that we see for trustees. But I'm going to focus mostly on my top 5 tips for trustees in 2024, because I'm a freelance consultant. I work with a range of charity boards when they have conflict or governance problems, and also when they're trying to plan ahead. I've been a trustee, I've been a chair of a charity, and I've been senior staff in a charity. So I've kind of seen all sides. What I like to do every year is to look back at what have been the questions that keep coming up for me in the sector, in the work I do. And from last year, I've tried to draw out my top 5 tips for what they're worth for you today. So all of these slides will be shared afterwards, so please don't feel like you have to write any of this down. And of course, you'll get the recording as well after today. And if things pop up in the chat, if you've got questions, please put them in. It's quite hard for me to follow the chat while I'm talking, but Tracy's going to do that for me. So we'll come to it at the end, and I'll make sure there's time for questions. So here's the training, which is a new training course that we're running this year for the first time on governance. It's 3 half-day online sessions. And the idea is that each half day is standalone on a key theme, but they do fit together if you're able to book on all 3. And I think you get a discount if you do. And what we've done in conversation with the information service at SCVO is to try and pull out the regular questions and challenges that trustees and senior staff find around governance, and to look into what are good practice tools that might help you and what research is there about what works. So it's quite practical and focused. The next sessions of this training are in May. But if you'd like, we can also run tailored in-house training. So if you'd like to bring together your whole board and maybe some of your staff, then we can organize something that might suit you specifically. So I'll just run quickly through the contents of the training. The first session is themed around running effective board meetings, because that's something we find comes up a lot. And so we'll look briefly at, refreshing everyone on what's governance, what's the difference between governance and management. We'll look at what makes an effective board meeting. And then we've got 6 steps for a good meeting. And then we've got some practical tips, like, for example, how to ask constructive questions so that if you're a trustee, you're able to make sure your staff feel accountable to the board while also feeling supported to improve. In each of these sessions, we'll make sure that there's time for you to learn something, to try some practical exercises, but also to reflect for yourself on where you think your organization is weak or strong, and then to chat to others on the training about how you might be able to improve. The second session is themed around strategy, culture, and values. So, we'll look at what is the strategic plan and what's the board's role in setting strategy. We'll look at some practicalities around planning, and we'll particularly focus on how the board can ask good questions to make sure that the strategy process is thinking about the right things. We'll look at risk, which Tracy has mentioned is really important for good governance. And we'll look at the board's role in setting culture and values, because for charities, it's not just what you do, but how you do it. And the third session is about board and staff relationships, which comes up time and again, certainly in my work, and I know in questions to the information service at SCVO. So we'll do some thinking about how the board and senior staff work together as a team, what good teams look like, what each person brings to a team and the need for that diversity of thinking. We'll look at the role of the chair. We'll look at how to avoid things going wrong or what to do when they do, particularly around how the board can challenge the staff, how to avoid groupthink, and the challenging personalities and dynamics that you can get in a group of people who are passionate about a cause. And we'll try putting ourselves in each other's shoes to get a sense of how it feels to be a senior staff person in a board meeting, or a trustee, or a chair. And again, as I said, there'll be time to reflect on your own board strengths and weaknesses and to listen to other people. So that's the training, which starts in May or can be delivered in-house. So please do have a look. I'll share the links later on in the presentation so that you can sign up if you'd like to do that. But what I thought I'd move on to now is to share with you my 5 top tips based on some of the challenges that I've seen coming up again and again for charity boards over the past year. Obviously, the challenges are always very complicated, and the top tips have to be quite simple because we've only got half an hour together. So what I've tried to do is to give you something to start from, something to start thinking about, and that might help you just take the first step. So these are my top tips, but I'm going to go through them one by one, starting with the challenge that I often hear. You'll probably see that I have had great fun in this presentation with the stock images that come with PowerPoint. So some of them are hilarious. Anyway, the first thing that I often hear is, our trustees are leaving and we don't know why. This seems to come up quite a lot at the moment because it's been a stressful few years with the pandemic and the changes, and with people working together online such a lot. So my tip here is check in with each other regularly. And so, as Tracy was saying before, it's really worth spending some focused time as a board, doing some kind of check about how you feel together that the board is doing. And so personally, I say do that every 1 or 2 years. Spend some time, step back from the day-to-day and think about how things are going. But do it also when things are changing. Start with yourself, ask yourself how you feel you're performing as a trustee, and also how you feel about the others on the board too. And move from that to have an honest conversation with the rest of the board about how everyone feels it's working. And it's surprising to me how often that doesn't happen in boards, and how when people create that space for honest conversation, we find out things about each other that we really didn't know, and which are quite surprising. It's worth asking the right person to help with that. So sometimes the chair is the right person because they know everybody and they have that trust. Sometimes they're really not the right person, and there might be somebody else on the board who has everybody's trust and who's more of a people person. Sometimes it might even be the chief exec, or sometimes if things are difficult, you might want to bring someone external in, and the information service can help you there if that's needed. I find it's really helpful to use an objective tool to do some of this. It takes the personalities out of the conversation. And so the governance checkup is something I use a lot with boards when they're having trouble. Just we can go in and we can talk objectively about where the board is strong or weak. And it just takes some of that emotion out of the conversation. So I'd advise doing that. And the idea is to just take a few practical actions. You can end up with a list of 500 things that you need to do to improve your charity governance. That doesn't help anybody. It's a continuous process, isn't it? You'll always be improving your governance. And so focus on the things that will make the people around the table feel that they're improving what needs to be done to support the charity. And don't forget to celebrate your strengths as well. It's often the case that everyone focuses on what's not good and doesn't take time to enjoy the good. So that's my first tip. Check in together, think about the people around the room, and also think about how you think you can improve as a team. Second thing I hear quite a lot, so we've brought in these new trustees. It took us ages to recruit them. We're 6 months behind now. We really need to get moving. Why are they not stepping up? And to be honest, I quite often have a lot of sympathy with the new trustees. I mean, I've been a new trustee, and sometimes it takes about a year just to work out how the organization works, who does what, and what all those acronyms mean. If you're only meeting every quarter, and if you're only meeting online, it's even harder. So I would really encourage you to spend as much time on induction as you do on recruitment. Take the time and plan it into the process to induct new trustees. Often people just get handed a massive file of paperwork when they start. The paperwork's important, but so are lots of other parts. Really useful to give people training on the roles and responsibilities of being a charity trustee. Sometimes people have done other governance roles, but they haven't worked with a charity before. Or sometimes, they've done it for years, but a reminder doesn't do any harm. And it means if you do hit a rocky road further down the way, everybody can be reminded about what a charity trustee is all about. So focus on the training, focus on the paperwork, of course, the constitution and the accounts and all those things people need to know, but also focus on the people. I spoke to one board recently where new people came in 18 months ago and they still didn't know the names of the other trustees around the table. So it's really important that people know who's who and feel part of a team. Don't forget to focus on the cause. It's not just about risk and responsibilities, but it's also about the inspiration. And it's about the organization, make sure people can get into the place where things happen, meet people, understand how it works in situ. And I'd strongly advise you to buddy up new trustees with someone who's been on the board for a while. Just allows them to ask the stupid questions outside the meeting. It also means that the existing trustees get the benefit of new ways of thinking and questions that they might not have asked for themselves. So it's just really helpful. Number 3, what do we do now? This is what you get when you search questions on images in PowerPoint, and I like this one. So quite often a board comes across a moment where it really doesn't know how to move forward, a question that's never been asked before, a challenge that's never come up before, and everyone just sits and looks at each other and they don't know what's the first step to take. So this is a really simple tip, but I'd strongly encourage you, when that happens, to start from what your constitution tells you. And again, it's just one of those things. People very rarely remember to look at their constitution when they're having a bit of a crisis. It's actually worth checking it really regularly. Because you never know when it's going to run out of date or when things are changing and your practice doesn't fit with what your constitution says. I would say bring a copy to meetings. I would say this is very boring, but it's really worth having one person who knows the constitution and can be the champion, the person who say, no, actually, we have to do it this way. When you check it regularly, think about whether you need to change it and how you do that. Your constitution will tell you how you do that. And if you're a charity, think about whether you need to tell the charity regulator, if you need to ask their permission to change something, or if you need to tell them afterwards. There are different rules for different kinds of changes, and you'll find all of that on the OSCAR websites. If you need to do something tricky to change your constitution, you might want some legal advice about how best to do that. And you can get pro bono legal advice through SCVO if you're a member. Okay, challenge number 4 for trustees is that inevitable energy slump that happens after you've been on the board for a few years. You've dealt with a few crises, you're stuck, lost motivation, and it seems to always be all about risk and money and difficult people. So what's my tip here? It's another pretty simple one, to be honest. It's don't forget to focus on the cause in your board meetings and in how you balance your time working for the charity. It's surprising how often, if you sit and think about the time that you're spending on the charity, 80 or 90% of it is about quarterly accounts or lengthy chief executive reports or difficult problems. And so I like to ask people, what makes you feel joy when you're part of this charity? Think about that, build it into your time supporting that charity. When I was a senior staff member for a fundraising charity, all I ever did, to be honest, was deal with crises, conflicts, problems, money. And once a month, I used to go down and work in the basement with the post-opening team and read all the letters that would come in from school kids sending money in from their bake sale or from old ladies who'd supported the charity for 50 years and get a sense about what it meant to them. And that would give me the motivation to carry on for another month. And I heard all those stories firsthand. So are you hearing stories? Do you really hear about what the charity's doing? Do you hear from the frontline staff as well as the senior staff, from the service users or the volunteers? Do you get to visit what's really going on? And are you celebrating the successes as well as dealing with the challenges? I would say make sure that you have time to do that in every board meeting, just even a little tiny bits, and regularly throughout the year in more focused ways. Okay, and last, the one that I hear all the time, this is when people bring in consultants, there's a looming crisis, or quite often the crisis has actually been looming for several years, and now it's actually right on the doorstep. And this is what you get if you type panic into the image search on PowerPoint, which is a very 2020s kind of an image, I think. So what to do when a crisis is looming? What I'd say here is it's really worthwhile knowing how you feel about risk. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, first of all, as a board, quite often you can be looking back all the time. You know, you get reports about what's happened over the past quarter. The annual report looks back. It's really important to be looking ahead as well as looking back. So please encourage the people who are reporting to you to be telling you about what's coming up, what the challenges or opportunities might be, and that gives you more of a sense of what the risks are in the environment that you're working in. So that's the first thing. The next thing I'd say is, as a board, do talk regularly about risk. And I don't mean that in the abstract. You know, sometimes you see people have a risk policy, they have a risk register, that's important. But, you know, they might just have downloaded them from the SCVO website. I hope you don't mind me saying that. And not really thought about what it means for them as an organization and as individuals. So what I'd say to you is talk about how you personally feel about risk in two different scenarios. So when times are good, you know, then a charity might want to take risks. You might want to innovate, do things you've not done before. You don't know if they'll work. You might feel one way about risk then. Or when times are hard, as they are at the moment, when money's hard to come by, when those funding decisions are delayed and you're really struggling, how do you feel then about risk? It might be quite different. And the other thing is to be honest about it, because quite often I find boards tend to say, oh yeah, we're really pro-risk. You know, the senior staff should feel that they can innovate and they can fail, and that's all good, there'll be no blame. When it actually happens, it's an entirely different matter. So try and think, practically speaking, pick a couple of scenarios that you can imagine happening to your charity and discuss how you would deal with those as a board, when times are good and when times are hard. The other thing is that everybody around the board table will have a different response to risk. You know, I'm really pro-risk in my life. I take quite a lot of risks. My husband is not. Between us, we make good decisions because, you know, we have to justify things to each other. He would never do anything. I would be changing things every week. Neither of those are good choices. So together we make good decisions, and that'll be the same around the board table. So, you know, some people will be constantly saying, oh, let's not try that, dangerous stuff. Other people will be racing ahead, wanting to try all kinds of new things. Across the board, hopefully you'll get a good range. And if you respect what each person is bringing to that conversation, then it'll be so much more helpful for the charity. And lastly, you know, it's hard times for charity boards at the moment. I don't see that that's going to change. Please do take time to support each other in good times so that you can support each other in bad times, and make sure there's always a cup of tea at the board meeting. So you have my 5 top tips for what they're worth. That's based on what I saw in boards last year. You can find out more about the training on the SCVO website, and you'll get this link at the end of today. You can contact me, and of course you can contact Tracy and the team at SCVO to deal with those challenging problems that you have. So thanks very much. I can see there's a few things popped into the chat. Hopefully those are some questions for me, and we've got a nice bit of time to cover those. So I'll stop sharing and see where we're at.
Thanks, Philippa. That was great. And I'm full of admiration that you managed to get joy and governance into the one sentence. Well done, you.
Well, if we can't have joy around a board table, where can we have it after all?
But yeah, and I love the thing about focusing on the cause, you know, because that keeps it fresh. Where do you stand on having service users on boards? You know, that's obviously going to help get that kind of voice. But I would always say, you know, I think it's important. It's great, but you have to support them. It doesn't have to be tokenistic, but they can add such value. What's your views on that?
I think it's a wonderful thing. If you can find service users who can bring that real experience round the board table, it tells you everything you need to know, for me, about a good quality board. But exactly what you said, Tracy, people need to be properly involved and supported. So it really depends. Obviously, every service providing charity is different. Sometimes that's much easier than other times. Sometimes you find that trustees are labelled the service user and treated differently, and that makes me uncomfortable, to be quite honest. So if you find it difficult to fully involve service users as trustees, like any other trustee around the table, then there might be other models that would work better for you. There's advisory groups or user panels or all kinds of other structures that can still feed into the board quite well and make sure those voices are there. I think if you're only hearing from the senior staff as a trustee, and then you're probably missing some voices. So it's good to find ways to get them in.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a question that have come in.